My mother abandoned me as a baby and went to jail twice for not paying child support, but she built a perfect family with 3 kids. Now she shows up 27 years later demanding forgiveness, and what I did broke them completely. I'm 27 years old. I work in digital marketing, and last week my biological mother and her husband showed up at my apartment door demanding that I give them a chance to be part of my life. And honestly, I need to tell this whole story because I'm sick of people telling me I should forgive or that family is the most important thing or all that crap they tell you when they don't know the real story. So here goes. From the beginning, because if you're going to judge me for what I did, at least let it be with all the facts on the table. My mother, Susan, abandoned me when I was like 6 months old. And when I say abandoned, I don't mean she left for a while, or needed space, or any of those excuses people use. I mean, she literally left my dad, Jeffrey, with a baby and took off because she didn't want to be a mother, period. My dad told me all this when I was like 8 or 9, not in a cruel way or anything, but because I had started asking questions. You know, all the kids at school had moms, and I only had my dad. And eventually you realize something doesn't add up. He explained it to me as gently as possible, told me that mom wasn't ready to be a mother, that some people just don't have that instinct, and that it wasn't my fault. He always made that very clear to me, that I hadn't done anything wrong, that she just couldn't handle the responsibility. What my dad didn't tell me until I was older is that Susan had to go to court because he sued her for child support. The judge ordered her to pay a monthly amount and have supervised visits every other weekend, but Susan basically ignored all of that. She'd show up maybe once every 3 or 4 months, always with excuses, always saying she'd been busy or forgot or had a problem at work. And I remember sitting in the living room waiting for her to arrive while my dad looked at me with that pitying face he tried to hide. Most of the time, she just didn't show up. Didn't call, didn't send a message, nothing. And when she did come, she'd stay for like an hour, ask me generic things like how's school going, and then say she had to leave. Never brought a gift, never remembered my birthday, never asked what I liked to do or if I needed anything. My dad worked in construction, killed himself working so he wouldn't lack anything, and Susan didn't even pay child support. My dad took her back to court when I was like 7 because she owed thousands of dollars, and the judge threatened her with jail if she didn't start paying. And you know what happened? Well, Susan kept not paying and actually went to jail, twice. The first time she was there for like 3 weeks. The second time was 2 months. And I remember my dad never talked bad about her in front of me. Never said this woman is trash or anything like that. Just said that mom was going through a difficult time and he hoped things would get better for her. My dad was like that. Like too good for this world. Honestly, when I was 6, Susan met Craig. Craig worked in car sales or something like that. I don't remember exactly, but the thing is they got married super fast, like in less than a year, and they started having kids. They had 3 total, all less than 2 years apart. And suddenly Susan could be a mother. You know what I mean? Like, with those kids, she did stay home, she did go to soccer games, she did help with homework, she did celebrate birthdays with big parties. But with me, she kept being the same. Maybe I'd see her twice a year if I was lucky. What really made me hate her, and yes, I know that's a strong word, but it's the right one, was when I was like 10 years old. My school did a Father's Day event, you know? One of those where dads come and do activities with their kids. And my dad was super excited because he always went to everything, to every school thing, to every game when I played baseball for 2 seasons, to every music recital when I tried to play the saxophone and was terrible. Anyway, that day, my dad couldn't go because he had an emergency at work, something about a pipe bursting at a house where he was working and he was the foreman, so he couldn't just leave. He called all upset, apologizing 1,000 times, and I told him it was okay. That I understood. Because I did understand. My dad was always there for me, and one time he couldn't make it. Wasn't the end of the world. But then, guess who showed up at school? Craig. He arrived in his car salesman shirt with his fake smile and told me, "Hey River, your mom told me your dad couldn't come, so here I am. We can do this together." And I just stood there like, what? Because this man had been in my life maybe 5 times in 4 years. He was nobody to me. He was just the guy who married the woman who abandoned me. I told him no thanks, that I'd rather do the activities alone. But he insisted, said it wasn't right for a kid to be alone on Father's Day. And my teacher, who didn't know the full situation, encouraged me to let Craig participate because she thought he was being nice. It was the worst hour of my life up to that point. Craig tried to act like we were super close, like he was my dad, and I just wanted him to leave. When the event finally ended, he told me that he and Susan wanted to see me more often, that they wanted me to get to know my half-siblings better, that they could be a real family for me. And I was 10 years old, but I wasn't stupid. I told him I already had family, that my dad was my family, and that they meant nothing to me. I remember his face changed completely, like he turned red and looked angry, but he didn't say anything, just left. My dad found out what happened because the teacher called him, thinking it had been a nice gesture, and my dad got furious, like I'd never seen him. He called Susan and yelled at her. I could hear him from my room, told her she had no right to send her husband to replace him, that if she didn't want to be my mother, that was her decision, but not to try to shove someone else into my life like it was nothing. After that, Susan and Craig basically disappeared completely. I think I saw them maybe 2 more times in the next 4 years, and I was honestly fine with that. My dad and I had our routine, our traditions, our inside jokes. He taught me to cook, took me fishing even though neither of us ever caught anything. We watched movies on Friday nights. He was my best friend besides being my dad. Everything I am, everything good in me, comes from him. And then when I was 14, my dad died. It was a heart attack, super sudden, like he was fine one day and the next he just collapsed at work. By the time the ambulance arrived, it was too late. He was 38. He was young. He was in good shape. Nobody expected it. And I was completely destroyed. Obviously. My whole world fell apart in a second. At the funeral, guess who showed up acting like they cared? Susan arrived crying, hugging me, and saying how sorry she was, and I was so in shock I didn't react. I just stood there like a robot. But Craig, this man had the audacity, at my father's funeral, to offer me a place to live in his house. He told me, I know this is difficult, River, but I want you to know you can come live with us. We can take care of you. You can have a room with your siblings. You can be part of our family. And something in me broke at that moment, like all the education my dad had given me about being respectful and polite just evaporated. I told him I'd rather live on the street than live with them, that he wasn't my dad and never would be, and that Susan had lost any right to call herself my mother a long time ago. My dad's uncles, Sean and Grant, were there at the funeral and heard me. They didn't have kids. They'd been a couple since before I was born, and they'd told my dad years ago that if anything happened to him, they would take care of me. So, after the funeral, when Susan started talking about custody and how legally she had rights, Sean and Grant hired a lawyer. Turns out my dad had made a will where he specifically said that if anything happened to him, he wanted Sean and Grant to raise me, not Susan. The lawyer also argued that Susan had abandoned her parental responsibilities for years, that she'd gone to jail for not paying child support, that she basically had no basis to claim custody now. The judge agreed, and I went to live with my uncles. And honestly, Sean and Grant saved my life. They gave me space to grieve, took me to therapy, made sure I finished school, supported me in everything. They didn't try to replace my dad, never asked me to call them dad or anything like that. They were just exactly what I needed at that moment. Real family that loved me unconditionally. Susan and Craig tried to contact me for years. Craig especially was persistent. Like he'd send me messages on birthdays and Christmas. I showed up at my high school graduation, even though I didn't invite him. Sent me a card when I started college. I blocked him from every new number he got. Deleted his emails without reading them. I basically did everything possible to make it clear I didn't want anything to do with him or Susan. Fast forward to like 2 months ago. I'm 27. I work in digital marketing, and I'm doing well. I live with my boyfriend, Hunter, in an apartment we love, and we're engaged. We're getting married next year. Life is finally good, you know what I mean? And I went to a birthday party for one of my cousins, from my dad's family, obviously, and it turns out someone invited Susan and Craig. I didn't know they were going to be there. If I'd known, I wouldn't have gone. But I arrived, and there they were. I tried to ignore them all night, talked to my uncles and other relatives, avoided any space where they were, but Craig cornered me in the yard. He approached with that salesman smile he has and told me we needed to talk. I told him we had nothing to talk about, but he continued, said he'd heard I was getting married and that he'd like to be involved, that it would be an honor for him to walk me down the aisle since your father can't do it. Those were his exact words. Since your father can't do it. Like my dad was just an inconvenience, like these 13 years of absence meant nothing. And that's when everything exploded. I told him, and I think the whole yard heard me because I was already yelling, that he was never my father, that my real father had died 13 years ago, after raising me alone and giving me everything while he and Susan ignored me. I told him that Susan abandoned me as a baby, that she went to jail for not paying child support, that she only decided to be a mother with her other kids but never with me. I told him he showed up in my life like 5 times when I was a kid and tried to replace my dad on Father's Day, and that was one of the most pathetic things I've ever seen. I told him I didn't want his money, didn't want his apologies, didn't want absolutely anything, from him or Susan, and to please leave me alone once and for all. Susan appeared in the middle of my monologue, crying, saying I was being cruel and that she'd tried her best. And I laughed. Literally laughed in her face. Told her her best attempt was seeing me twice a year for an hour while raising 3 kids with Craig, that her best attempt was going to jail instead of fulfilling her responsibilities. I told her I didn't consider her my mother, that the only people who earned that title in my life were my dad and my uncles, and that she was simply the woman who gave birth to me and nothing more. The party was basically ruined after that. Some relatives supported me, others said I'd been too harsh, that Susan and Craig just wanted to fix things. But Sean and Grant hugged me and told me I'd done right to set boundaries, that I didn't have to accept toxic people in my life just because we shared blood. I thought that would be the end. But no. 2 days later, Susan called me. I know how she got my current number because I'd blocked her from all the previous ones. But she called and started yelling at me, saying I had no right to talk to her like that she was my mother and deserved respect, that Craig had tried to be a father figure to me and I'd rejected him, that my half-siblings wanted to meet me and I was being selfish by denying them that relationship. I told her that respect is earned, not demanded, and that she hadn't done anything to earn mine. I told her her other kids weren't my problem, that I didn't ask to be her failed experiment before she decided she did want to be a mother with another family. And I hung up on her. And that's where we get to last week. Craig showed up at my apartment. I guess Susan gave him the address or he got it from some relative. He knocked on the door on a Saturday morning. Hunter opened it because I was in the shower, and when I came out, there was Craig in my living room. Hunter looked uncomfortable, like he didn't know if he should have let him in or not, but I immediately told Craig to leave. He started with the speech about just wanting to fix things, that family is important, that we couldn't go on like this, all that garbage. I told him to leave or I'd call the police. He got all dramatic, said he wasn't going to leave until we talked like adults, that he'd invested years trying to connect with me and deserved at least a conversation. And that's what finished me off, you know? I yelled at him that he hadn't invested shit in me, that the few times I saw him as a kid didn't count as investment, that showing up every 2 years with generic messages wasn't effort. I told him my dad, rest in peace, had invested every second of his life in me, that my uncles had invested 13 years raising me when he and Susan didn't want to, and that they were my real family. I told him, if he showed up at my apartment again, or contacted me in any way, I was getting a restraining order. Hunter was there, backing me up, like literally stood between Craig and me to make sure Craig didn't try to get closer. And Craig finally left. But before leaving, he said I was going to regret it, that someday I was going to need them, and they weren't going to be there. And I told him perfect, that I'd lived 14 years with my dad, 13 years with my uncles, and now with Hunter, and I'd never needed them and never would. I closed the door and stood there for like 5 minutes, hands shaking, trying to process what had just happened. Hunter hugged me and told me I'd done the right thing, that nobody has the right to force themselves into your life just because they share DNA with you. I blocked all the numbers I could find for Susan and Craig, told my uncles what happened, and they told me if Craig showed up again, they'd take care of talking to him or contacting the police if necessary. And here I am now, honestly exhausted from this whole situation. People keep telling me I should consider giving them a chance, that maybe Susan really regrets it, that Craig seems like he genuinely cares. But I don't owe them anything. You know what I mean? I didn't ask to be born, didn't ask for Susan to abandon me, didn't ask for Craig to try to play dad when it was convenient for him. My dad taught me that family is more than blood, that family is the people who are there when things get tough, not the ones who show up 27 years later wanting credit for nothing. Hunter and I are getting married in July next year. Sean and Grant are going to walk me down the aisle, one on each side, because they earned that place. My half-siblings, Susan and Craig's kids, aren't invited because I don't know them and don't want to know them. It's nothing personal against them, but I don't have any relationship with them, and I'm not going to force one just to make Susan feel better. And if anyone has a problem with that, honestly, they cannot come to the wedding too. Maybe I sound bitter or resentful, and maybe I am I'm not going to lie. But after 27 years of being ignored, rejected, and abandoned, I think I have a right to be angry. I think I have a right to decide who's part of my life and who isn't. And I definitely think I have a right to protect my peace of mind and my happiness from people who only caused me pain. Last week, Hunter found me looking at old photos of my dad from when I was a kid and he'd carry me on his shoulders, or when he taught me to ride a bike and looked more excited than I was. And he told me, "You see all that happiness in those photos, all that peace. That's what you deserve now too. You don't have to carry the weight of people who were never there for you." And he's right, I guess. My dad gave me all the love I needed. My uncles continued that legacy, and now Hunter is here doing the same. I don't need more than that. I don't want more than that. So yes, I permanently cut contact with Susan and Craig. I'm not going to change my mind. I'm not going to give them another chance. I'm not going to let them ruin what I've built. And if that makes me a bad person in some people's eyes, well, I guess I'll have to live with that. But at least I'm going to live in peace, surrounded by people who really love me and who were always there, and that's enough for me.